Good evening and welcome to Behind the Mic for this Friday, May 28th. I'm your host, Jonathan Hodgson, back with you and ready for another visit with the sportscaster. Tonight, I'm joined by Brendan Parker. Brendan is the host of Flames TV, covering the Calgary Flames on a daily basis throughout the season, conducting interviews with players, coaches, and delivering reports, all found on the team's website and social media presence. We'll talk to Brendan about the 2020-21 season for the Flames, the major developments, including the hiring of Darryl Sutter for his second tenure with the club, and what lies ahead after missing the playoffs this season in the North Division. And we'll also talk to Brendan about his time before joining the Flames. He was a sports anchor and reporter at Global TV Calgary for 7 years, where he covered the entire Calgary sports scene. We'll talk to him about that time and get him to reflect on some of his best memories from that chapter in his career and other things. So once again, many thanks for watching wherever you may be tuned in from tonight. Just a reminder before we head to break and bring in Brendan on the other side, you can find all of our Behind the Mic archives and archives of all our other shows here at ASTV at our website, astvproductions.com. And we also simulcast on Facebook. And you can also find our updates on Twitter as well. So once again, thanks so much for tuning in. Excited for this one. A little bit of hockey talk, and we'll see where else it goes with Brendan. We're excited for it. And so we'll step aside for a quick break here and be back on the other side of this message with Brendan Parker from Flames TV. And once again, welcome back to Behind the Mic. Jonathan Hodgson with you, joined now by our guest this week, Brendan Parker from Flames TV. Brendan, welcome.
Hey, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you on. I've been I've been waiting to get you on for a little while here, and so we're thrilled to have you on and talk a little bit of hockey and talk a little bit about the Calgary sports scene. I grew up in Calgary and left about 4 or 5 years ago, so I caught a good chunk of your career at Global TV. So it's fun to be able to connect and do this with you today.
Well, and I think I even remember sneaking into the broadcast booth with you one time at an Okotoks Dogs game, maybe for a quick visit during an inning as well, which is obviously, I know you love it just as much as I did. You know, being able to go out there and watch ball games, and we missed it last year, so hopefully we can get a chance to get out to Siemens Stadium again this summer.
Oh, absolutely. And you might not want to get me started on the Dogs too much, because I'll make that into a full show. But that was a special time, being able to start my career in what was really a dream job, if for anybody who has ever seen what ball games at Siemens Stadium in Okotoks looks like. But yeah, fun memories for sure. And we'll dive back into the Calgary sports scene here in a little bit. But you spend the entire season covering the Calgary Flames up close for the team. It's been over for, by the time this airs, it'll be over for about a week, 2 weeks. What does after covering the team every day for a number of months, what does that first little bit of downtime look like after the season comes to an end?
Yeah, it's different. I mean, you're kind of, especially this year, because it was a lot of uncertainty leading up, to the season, and weren't exactly sure what happened, but it's been kind of broken up into odd segments with, the pandemic hitting, and obviously everything was put on pause, but then, the summer bubble, and we kind of worked in months that would normally be quiet. It was, games every other day pretty much, or every day during the playoff bubble. And then it halts again, and we kind of have another mini off season and just sort of waiting to find out when everything was going to start again. And really since January on, as soon as kind of Christmas was over, it was kind of a full sprint for 4.5 months or so. So, it was crazy to have a couple of days off consecutively here over the weekend, and just in time for the Victoria long weekend, and just kind of enjoyed some time with family. And and then actually kind of diving right back into work here this week now for the PWHPA women's hockey, which is on all week in Calgary. So we kind of get to extend the season by a little bit and see some of the best women in Canada play. And they'll actually play the final 3 games over at the Scotiabank Saddledome, which I'll be working those games. So get to extend it a little bit more, and then enjoy some downtime at the end of the weekend.
How much of the NHL playoffs first round have you been watching?
Quite a bit, actually. It's funny. I mean, I would assume, the team and players might view it differently, but it's now that you see fans kind of going back into the buildings, it's created kind of a whole new level of excitement in my mind. And I know it's a little bit different for the Canadian teams in the North Division, but at the same time, the hockey's been so good that you're still just enjoying every moment of it. Like the Edmonton-Winnipeg series, I thought it's been fantastic. And I know it ends in a sweep, which is hard to believe in a lot of ways, but the hockey has been fantastic. And same with the Leafs and Habs. I think, again, it takes a little bit of the sting out of it, just not having the fans when you compare it to what we've seen now for 2 weeks or a week and a half in the States. Especially like you look at Carolina and Florida the other night, the buildings are just exploding. It's just so great to see. And I hope Canada's kind of back in that same spot here in the not too distant future, but it's been fun to watch. I've been taking in basically as much as I can possibly absorb, and maybe as much as my family will allow.
For sure. And I share those sentiments, and watching snippets of those US series, and just how different a feel it is back with fans back in the building, and especially that Carolina Nashville series, I found anyway, especially with Carolina getting to be the first ones to do it, and players saying that it was 12,000, but it felt like 20,000. And you covered the Flames for an entire season, getting into the building, sitting on the second level to do your intermission reports and such, with yourself, Lou, Peter Loubardias, Matt Stajan, and others, and that was about it. How strange was that?
It was very strange. I mean, I think you kind of, like anything, you get used to it over time, but you still, like, every once in a while kind of sit there and look around and just realize how few people are in the building with you at the same time. And it's unique. I mean, I hope we never have to go through it again to that level. But just sitting, I mean, it has its odd perk, like the fact that our desk would normally be set up in kind of the bowels of the arena, right on the event level in between the two dressing rooms. And ironically, like, I'll be there for every home game, but not actually see much of it live. I'm watching on a monitor, generally speaking. So, the fact that I could just turn my chair and watch the game from the second level certainly had its perks. But the building has zero atmosphere. You're obviously pumping in crowd noise or simulated crowd noise in the background, and the players are hearing that, but it's not the same, right? I mean, it's the goals and the gameplay itself is, fairly normal. It's when you have those moments in a game where we all know create energy, get the fans standing up, that aren't a goal. A goal goes in, the music comes on, and it still kind of feels somewhat normal. But it's like the hits, it's the big saves where you're almost not even really sure if it happened or not. You're just basing everything on the reaction of the bench, and that never really became normal, at least to me. And I'm sure the players felt the same way. Like there's times where, like, I remember Milan Lucic ran over Ben Sherrod at one point, and the bench gets excited, but those are the kind of moments that, hockey kind of thrives on, right? The whole building stands up, everybody starts buzzing a little bit more. Those just don't exist. And I can imagine it would have been tough over the course of a regular season for players. I mean, a little different when it's playoffs and the Stanley Cup's on the line, but regular season, as you get into kind of the thick of it, it's challenging. For sure, it is strange, but you kind of get used to it a little bit. Let's just hope that was a one and done.
Well, hopefully things keep trending in the right direction up here in Canada throughout the off season, and we're at least closer to normal to start next season. But going on the ice for the Flames for a few minutes, they missed the playoffs this season by 4 points, finishing 5th in the North Division. And they bring back Darryl Sutter mid-season for a second tenure with the club as head coach. As they start their off season now, what do you see as some of the major questions that they're going to have to tackle this summer?
Yeah, I think there certainly are a few. I mean, anytime you miss the playoffs, I think there's always some hard questions that have to be answered for sure. And this year maybe a little bit more so, just in the fact that it's going to be a different off season, just given the circumstances of an expansion draft mixed in there. You've got a flat salary cap that a lot of teams are going to have to wrangle with, not excluding the Calgary Flames, and they'll have their workout cut out for them too, but also just the timing of, where this core is at right now. And I think, that's one of the questions that came out of our exit interview day, listening to the likes of, Mark Giordano and his conversations around the expansion draft. Obviously a longtime captain and a huge part of the core of this team. I think, Brad Treliving called him kind of the conscience of the team. And, you don't throw those kind of words around. Johnny Gaudreau's coming up on his final year of a contract. Sean Monahan has 2 left, and Matthew Tkachuk has 1 left as well. So you're just, you're kind of at a point right now with your core that you have some decisions to make, not necessarily about trades. Maybe it goes that way, maybe it doesn't, but also just signings, and what does it look like moving forward? Who do you kind of see as your core moving forward? At the end of the day, Mark Giordano will be 39 playing next year, right? And, those are the kinds of questions that are way above most people's pay grades. Those are decisions that, you don't envy having to make, but that have to be made. And I think part of it that we don't know this year is the fact that Darryl Sutter comes in, and, you heard Brad Treliving say when he hired him that he was going to be here for a while. This isn't something that's just a one and done, try to get us into the playoffs this year situation. This is a guy that's going to be around. He signs a 3-year contract and he's not going anywhere. So how much of a part of the decision process is he going to be? How collaborative is it going to be between him and upper management? I think they're having those conversations right now as they approach the offseason, how they kind of look into it. So there's a lot of questions, I think, with this team right now. But the one thing that has been a question every offseason that won't be this year is the fact that they got a goaltender now. So you got a number 1 goaltender for the next, 5 years, locked up. He looked every bit of it, aside from a stretch kind of in the middle of the season when he was battling some injuries. But that's kind of nice for this team, is you don't have to worry about that position. So now you kind of attack the rest of it. I think you still got a lot of great pieces up front, on the back end, kind of throughout your lineup, but you gotta find out how to, best support that now over the offseason, and what types of changes, if any, you're going to make.
Yeah. And kind of supporting what you said there about, what Treliving said about Darryl. Darryl's, he's the guy for a while now. Paraphrasing what Sutter said in his intro conference, was he paraphrasing, he said that I'm not coming back to just coach. I'm coming back to win the Stanley Cup. And that's a pretty bold statement for anybody to make coming into a new job, and a team that evidently has some work to do. They had that they seem to have that bolt of energy when he came back. And even in that couple of games where he was going through protocol and couldn't be with the team yet, there seemed to be a bit of energy just before he got there. And they finished up 6-4 in their last 10, but in the middle they still had some trouble. How much work do you think there is to get to to get this roster to a Darryl Sutter type team, and how much of a Darryl Sutter type team that Flames fans of the past might remember. For example, of course, that 04 finals team, the stealing a Berkey word, truculent. How much of that type of Darryl Sutter team can there be in today's game?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of heard him talk in the last couple of weeks about size, and I think he was asked, "Do you still need those types of teams to win in the NHL?" And he referenced back, the Tampa Bay Lightning team that added some beef before they finally got to the other side and ended up winning the Stanley Cup last year. Guys like Luke Shen and Zach Bogosian, and they added some of that grit, that toughness. Blake Coleman as they went for their run, and then you look back at St. Louis, who certainly fit that mold as well. So you can certainly make that argument that you have to have it, but I also think that at the same time, the NHL, it's not 100% that anymore either, right? I think you have to have speed, you have to have skill. Well, one of the things we saw make a big difference with Darryl and this team is their commitment to the defensive end, and I think they, in the last stretch of the season, turned into one of the better defending teams in the NHL, which is huge. And you can't win a Stanley Cup, you can't get into the playoffs, you can't have success in the playoffs without being a good defending team. The problem with this group was that they struggle to score goals. So to me, and Darryl obviously will look at this differently, and that's kind of the $1 million question right now, is just how exactly are his player evaluations? What do they look like compared to either what other coaching staff have seen with this group, or what is the difference between that and management? They struggle to score goals this year. There's no doubt about it. And, Johnny Gaudreau, I thought, had a great year offensively, and yet still there were times where this team, needed goals and couldn't find them. And you end up losing a number of lower scoring games. And even though you're defending well, you're not getting the breaks, maybe you're not getting the puck luck, but either way, you're ending up on the losing side of a lot of those. And so, it's kind of a two-part question. I mean, sure, do you want to be a little bit, tougher to play against? I think without a doubt that fits what Darryl wants to do. And you could see just by the way they play, getting pucks in. And, I look at a guy like Milan Lucic and Andrew Mangiapane, how much success they had just with that style of play, because they go down and they chase pucks and they chip pucks back into their own hands and kind of feed the offense that way. But it's about the finish too. So how much are you going to, rely on that versus how much do you need to maybe support that offensive side a little bit more as well? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how they approach things and what exactly they target here in the offseason.
Be interesting to watch for sure. All right, we're going to take a break here, and we'll be back on the other side with more with Brendan Parker here on Behind the Mic on ASTV Production. With Brendan Parker of Flames TV visiting with us this week on Behind the Mic, talking in that first block about the season that was for the Calgary Flames, and we're going to pivot here in a moment, but just one more note on the Flames that I wanted to get to that has a local tie for Calgary hockey fans was the last game of the season saw the NHL debut of Matthew Phillips, 2016 sixth round pick. Calgary kid finally gets in to make his debut at the Saddle Dome. He's somebody that I know quite well from his junior days in Victoria, and I'm sure somebody that you know really well as well. How happy were you for Matthew to get in that last game this year?
Yeah, extremely. I mean, you could kind of see it on his face. He came out to take that solo lap, which ironically he's done before. I think he took one back in 2019. He was called up just before Christmas with the Flames, and then in Arizona ends up taking the warm up, didn't play the game. So he's now 2 solo laps into his career, which is cool. but you could tell that second one, or the one in the season finale, meant a lot more, just given the circumstances. Being back at the Scotiabank Saddledome, a building he spent a lot of time in, both as a fan and as a player, and knowing he was going to make his NHL debut, you couldn't wipe the smile off his face. So extremely happy for him. He's had success, and as you'd know it better than anyone, just every level he's played in, whether it's in the minor hockey ranks, Bow Valley, or midget AAA with the Calgary Buffaloes, and then the American Hockey League. He's been a real good pro for the Calgary Flames system, Stockton Heat, for the 3 years now. And I think it's great that he got an opportunity to make his NHL debut and to kind of see where he's at. And I thought he was great. I thought he, created every time he was out there. I thought, he made great decisions with the puck, and was in the right position as a winger, most of the time. I thought he handled himself really well. And I think that's got to be something cool for him to take into the offseason as well. I mean, he spends a lot of time working out, obviously, as a Calgary guy with the Flames group. So he spent, a ton of time with, Mark Giordano and Michael Stone and Dylan Dubé and all those guys every offseason and over the past year where they're waiting to play games. He was in those groups. So he's been around it for a long time. I think everybody was super happy for him to get that opportunity. And I think he handled himself really well. So good for him. And what a great story. Just obviously we know the size, and 5'7", and you're never going to hear that as any reason for Matthew Phillips not to get there. I think he knows he can play at that level and expects nothing less at some point. And it was cool to see him get the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the one element that would have made it a little extra special would have been the ability to have family and such at the game, which wasn't a possibility this year. But were you with the team at the preseason game in 2019 in Victoria?
I was. When he had what did he have? He had a goal set up, the overtime winner, I think it was.
I think so, and he had a bunch of chances, and
Yep.
That was 7,000 people at that barn in Victoria. The Flames and Canucks playing a preseason game before last season. That was his first visit back to Victoria after he played for the Royals, scored 50 goals in the season, topped 100 points, captained him his last go around there before going pro. So he didn't, his NHL debut was a little bit different, but both of us being in the barn that night in Victoria, that was a really cool moment for Philly.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I remember we were walking the concourse and they had like Matthew Phillips bobblehead, must have been from his final year there, just kind of on the concourse, and people were buying him up. And, you could tell with the marquee, he may have been a Flames prospect in Canucks Nation over there on the island, but you could tell that everybody was rooting for Matthew Phillips. I think they gave him like the little first TV timeout salute too, and he gave the crowd a little wave, and guys were giving it to him on the bench a little bit. And yeah, it was that was very cool, and he played really well, as you kind of laid out. I mean, I think it was Dylan Dubé that ended up winning it in overtime on a pass from Matthew Phillips. So kind of a little bit of a storytell finish there for Phillips in his return.
And that's the craziest thing for Victoria Royals people, to see Philly playing with Dylan Dubé.
Yeah.
The old Kelowna
rivals.
Rocket. He is the enemy.
Yeah.
Except when he's playing with Philly.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as he's finishing off a Philly pass, then it's all good. But outside of that, they can't stand Dylan Dubé with the Kelowna Rockets, right?
No. The other local tie for Calgary hockey that was really cool to see this season was the debut of Peyton Krebs, the first rounder for the Vegas Golden Knights, made his debut this season in Vegas, and he started with the ice in the Western Hockey League. Came out of Calgary, and the Krebs family from nearby Okotoks, as we referenced off the top of the show, they're building quite quite a family legacy with all three brothers having played in the Western Hockey League. Of course, Dakota played with the Calgary Hitmen, and now Drew is making his mark with the Medicine Hat Tigers. How impressive is that to see what the Krebs family is doing?
Yeah, super impressive. And yeah, they seem to almost kind of get better as you go down the line. And I believe, Madison Krebs also has a new single out right now too, country music star. So, well, let's just say that the genes are pretty talented in the Krebs family. I actually had a chance to go out and visit with them. It was leading up to Peyton's draft year. And at Flames TV, we kind of try and go around and chat with some of the local draft prospects. So we went and spent some time with him and Dakota out at their house and showed us, kind of their digs and where they practice in the garage, and just a really, great family, happy for Peyton. And then obviously he suffered that, Achilles injury just prior to the draft, which, may or may not have affected the draft status. But either way, he gets selected to Vegas, and he climbs all the way back. And, obviously the Western Hockey League was a little bit different this year and playing out of that bubble in Regina. But just the fact that he was able to get some games in this year and last, and obviously an elite player at that level. So, for him to go up now and play a role at the NHL level, I think he's a huge part of that Vegas future. And they've got a few good prospects there, and he's right at the top of that list. So good for Peyton. And, even Dakota, I think he got signed. I think it was like a PTO or an ATO tryout to go join the Toronto Marlies when they were in town too. And so we were happy to be kind of finishing up our stuff and watched him practice a couple times with the Marlies, and right after the Flames finished up and they were going to play Stockton. So a nice little pro experience for him, and he'll join the University of Calgary Dinos, I think, whenever they get started again in the fall. So good for that family. And Drew will be, he's got some big shoes to fill coming up, but I know a real talented player there in Medicine Hat.
Now that Krebs family, I've had a little bit of interaction with the brothers, and they're all top shelf people. And when Peyton came through Victoria, I was still pretty new in following the Western Hockey League, and was at the game of the fan and was looking through the lineup card, and there's a player coming through that was from Okotoks, and I'm from Calgary, but I regard Okotoks as my hometown.
Yeah.
And so when I see a player coming through that's from Okotoks, got to meet him. And
absolutely.
The rooms and the locker rooms in Victoria are accessed through the concourse, so you have pretty easy access to the players after the game. So I go over there and I ask for Peyton just purely because he's from Okotoks, and talk for a couple of minutes and get a picture, and there was not a thought in my mind about how good he was. And then I go back home after and look up his hockey DB, and I'm, holy smokes, this guy's pretty good. So my kind of laugh about Peyton is the one time that I've spent time with him so far, it had nothing to do with how good he was. And then of course after that, the family was great, and every time Dakota would come through, he would make sure to spend time with me and stuff. So great people.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I wanted to put it back on you now for most of the rest of our time here, and we're talking about players that come out of Calgary. And I wanted to talk about some of the people that you've had a chance to work with in your time covering the Flames. Since joining them in 2018, and we've kind of referenced them a little bit so far, but a lot of your work in intermission reports and such is done with people like Peter Loubardias, the longtime veteran NHL and junior hockey broadcaster who's been with the Flames for a few seasons. Matt Stajan, former Calgary Flame player, has jumped in as an analyst. What's it like to work with people like that who are veterans in the NHL and come from unique standpoints?
Yeah, it's obviously one of the great perks of the job. I feel like, I mean, with the case of specifically, I'll start with him just because he's kind of done a bulk of our post games, pretty much 90% of them this year. And that's kind of something that we started last year. He kind of was dabbling in, obviously working with Sportsnet a little bit. And so we asked him if he'd be interested in helping out on Flames TV, which he was. And then started kind of more full-time in the bubble, the playoff bubble, where he was on with us pretty much every game. And it's kind of built from there. And he's obviously had a great career playing over 1,000 games in the NHL and with the Leafs and Flames, and the insight. I think the best part for me is, as you kind of talked about, sitting up there in the second level. It's just the two of us, but we get to if we're watching a game together, some of the things that he kind of points out that you can see through the eyes of a guy who's played, understanding small parts of the game that you wouldn't think of, is that's the best part, just kind of seeing it through their eyes and just understanding the game at a different level, which obviously they lived it, they breathed it, they understand it. So I think that to me is the kind of the biggest perk, and he's just becoming a good broadcaster too. I mean, I know he had a great NHL career and you don't ever really think about that side of it, but we have a ton of fun. I think that's kind of the other thing that we've always thought of, at least with the, specifically with the post-game show, is at the end of the day, we're still talking hockey, and obviously the tone or the mood changes depending on the result of the game, wins versus losses, but it's hockey, and it's an escape. So our mindset was always like, let's have some fun. And we kind of introduced a few different segments and obviously built our chemistry a little bit more. And that's kind of an element that we're always trying to bring to it. And his relationship with the players is great too, just to be able to, have obviously some experience with them, some stories, and they go back and forth a little bit, but it just adds a different dimension to the post-game show, which we've enjoyed, and hopefully we can continue. And then with, Lou, I mean, what can you say about Lou? He comes down every time we ask to see if he'd join us on the intermission show. I mean, keep in mind, he's broadcasting the game up in the gondola, in the broadcast booth, and he'll come down every intermission and talk hockey with us happily. And he's just the best. I mean, Lou and I obviously have spent a lot of time together, and he's, like you, one of my mentors in the industry in terms of everything he's been through, and a guy that we kind of basically sit every practice and chat, talk hockey, and it's the best to be able to do it with him. So we're lucky to have a lot of good people in this market, and former NHLers included now. But Lou and his insight is still right up there in terms of everyone in our market and breaking things down. So I'm always privileged to be able to spend time with all those guys.
Yeah, my first interaction with Lou was a number of years ago now. He was the lead play-by-play man for a Shaw TV package covering the Western Canadian Baseball League, and he did a number of games in Okotoks. So I had the third base side of the press box. He had the first base side doing the TV side, and had a chance to collaborate on notes and stuff before some games. And a couple of games into their TV package, we were just sitting around before games talking about life, and he was no longer, this NHL broadcaster, and still keep in touch a little bit. During the summer, he'll send me a message here and there asking me when the Dogs Academy is playing so he can go down and watch some games.
Yeah.
Top shelf guy for sure. And he was actually our first guest here on Behind the Mic a few months ago. But you talk about developing chemistry with your colleagues on air. What goes into that, developing an on-air rapport and an on-air relationship with your analysts? And as we talk about having two guys that come from different backgrounds with different strengths, what goes into building that rapport?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I don't think it's ever necessarily the same answer either. I think because going back to, even Global, that was really my first time trying to develop chemistry on air. And it started with like doing weekend sports. I don't know how much news you watch or how much you have in the past, but one of the things that always kind of stood out or stands out, in terms of either it looks seamless and it looks easy, or it can also create some of the most awkward and painful moments in television history when you're got an anchor person, a news anchor, a weather anchor, and then the sports guy comes on. And, you know, like me, I'm a little bit goofy, a little bit over the top. You know, sometimes that's, again, how I view sports. It should be light. You know, in my mind, if I was coming on the newscast, it was to provide a bit of levity from what you were just hammered with over the last, 15, 20 minutes. And you can always feel it. You can feel chemistry, whether it's good or bad. And I was lucky. I worked with Jamie Dahl in the early going when I got over there, and we just sort of kind of hit it off on air and off air, like we were just friends. And then obviously working together, it just kind of it's easy when chemistry is there. It's easy, and that's kind of what you want. You want to be able to kind of play off each other. Have discussions that kind of flow, aren't choppy and awkward, but it's not always as easy as, saying this is kind of the way you go about building chemistry. And then, I look at a guy like Stage, obviously it's a different world. It's not news, but you're right. Chemistry is important. So, but to me, it's about reps. Like you have to spend time doing it. You can't build chemistry without being able to do it and being able to sit side by side and break down hockey games and talk about it. Feed off one another, kind of understand how he wants to take things, how he likes to take things. And as a host, that's kind of my job too, right? I'm not there to provide my analysis. Nobody cares about Brendan Parker's what he sees. But again, we kind of keep it light and just try to support each other. And I think for us, it was more about reps. It's always about the more time you spend on air together, the better chance you'll have at finding chemistry. And it doesn't even always work out that way either. Like sometimes you can try all you want, but chemistry just isn't there for whatever reason. It's a hard thing to find. And when you have it, you know it. And when you know it, you got to embrace it and kind of harness it. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Stage actually coaches my son in hockey. So we spend a little bit of time together off the ice and, over at the AMP Hockey Academy. And so, I think all of that stuff helps, just having kind of a personal relationship. But then to me, the biggest thing is reps. You got to have the reps. And if you don't have those, it doesn't matter, what the offset chemistry is like, you probably aren't going to have as much success. So reps, that'll be my answer.
For sure. And before we go to our next break, you brought up something that I think it is important for young aspiring broadcasters out there. It's the you mentioned the live TV can lead to some hiccups, and I know as I've been the young broadcaster who wants to avoid the hiccup and wants everything to go smoothly. You're not always going to avoid the mistake. You're not going to avoid having any awkward moments. Was there anything that got what's your do you have any kind of, as one of my former instructors would call them, train wreck moments? And how do you approach that, and how do you move on from that?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely all have them. And you know what? The best part about those is that, I always think that, much like, an athlete will give you the thought about it's the failures that make you better, not the successes. It's kind of that same thing. I mean, you can't, especially in the early days, I obviously I worked at the WHL on Shaw when I was like really kind of breaking into the industry when I was in Prince Albert. And, there were moments where, words didn't, like getting used to live television, and, you're not spitting words out properly, and, not necessarily train wrecks, but things you're like, oh goodness, like how did that just happen, kind of thing. And then obviously when you're at Global, you get a little bit more time on air, and you're open for more mistakes, right? It happens. I remember, there's times where highlight packages aren't cut the way that you think, or things change or they fall out. It's live television, and you have to try to follow along with it no matter what happens. But sometimes you do something one way and then, nothing's working, and you just have those nights where it's like nothing seems to line up and you're fighting it the whole time. And I guess kind of as you get more experience, you kind of turn those train wrecks, so to speak, into kind of blips, right? You kind of figure out how to manage them and how to figure it out. But deadlines are always going to be the big one. Like if you got a late Flames game and you're scrambling everything in, I remember one time on air, I had actually, I was getting vertigo. I don't know if you've ever had vertigo before, but like the whole room starts spinning, and it happened to me earlier in the day, like kind of mild. And I still went into work, and we were doing the 6:00 show. And just before before sports, which was about 6:45. So around 6:30 or so, I started getting vertigo again, and the world is spinning. And at that point, like it's too late to do anything about vertigo or the show. So my show's kind of prepared, and I go in, and I can't even see like the camera, like the whole room is spinning. I had to do like 6.5 or 7.5 minutes of sports, and I couldn't see like the camera in front of me. It was so bad. And I don't even remember what the show was like. I think I was probably just happy to get through it at that point. But there was no teleprompter. You weren't reading teleprompter. So you're just kind of like faking your way through it almost to get through it. But so there's plenty of train wreck moments, but I think the art is kind of turning the train wreck into, maybe something that even the viewer doesn't recognize, aside from the odd, technical glitch or maybe the odd, misspeak or something like that. But you turn those train wrecks into just sort of small errors and not compound them, if you will.
No, one of my tough moments that has now become kind of a fun story to talk about is one of my final years with the Dogs in Okotoks. We were in the playoffs, and it was Game 5, and I come down with a massive head cold, and should not have gone to the game, but I was gonna go to the game, and it was in Lethbridge, and I knew my voice wasn't gonna hold up, and Jerry Howard, the legendary radio voice of the Toronto Blue Jays, told me, go to the concourse and ask for vinegar and keep it with you throughout the game, and just sip very small amounts of vinegar throughout the game, and it'll get your voice through. And so when we get there, I sent one of our players to the concession to ask for a cup of vinegar. Got a lot of really strange looks from the player for asking him to ask for that, but it got me through. It wasn't pretty, but it got me through. So you just gotta do what you gotta do.
No kidding. That's great. What a story. And it worked. That's got to taste awful.
It was horrendous. It was horrible. And I know Les Lazaruk from the Saskatoon Blades has used that from time to time as well. So one of those little hacks. But we got to step aside here for another break. We'll be right back with another segment with Brendan Parker from Flames TV.
At Collins Hotel, we have you and your family's comfort in mind. Relax in one of our 16 suites featuring king or queen size beds and 36-inch TVs. Suites also include a mini fridge and other kitchen appliances to make your stay as comfortable as possible. During your stay in Pilot Mound, visit Weiser's Restaurant, our attached family-friendly restaurant and bar. It is the perfect location to host group meals, dine with the family, or unwind after a hockey game. Come in and meet our friendly staff offering daily specials on food and drinks, wing night Wednesdays, buffet Fridays, and multiple TVs to watch the game. Weiser's is the place to be. Collins Hotel and Weiser's Restaurant and Bar, located across the street from Blackjack Stewart Arena off Highway 3 in Pilot Mound.
Here on Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions. Thanks so much for spending part of your Friday night with us, Jonathan Hodgson and Brendan Parker, in conversation this week. Had some fun in the last block talking about old broadcaster stories, and you added a highlight to your career this season as you made your first appearance on Hockey Night in Canada back in April. What was that experience like, getting on Hockey Night in Canada for the first time?
Yeah, it was pretty special. Obviously, I think, that as a young broadcaster, as a kid, you always kind of looked up to people who were on that show, Scott Oak and Ron McLean especially, and to be able to share the screen with the two of them was a pretty cool moment. At the time, I don't think, you try not to worry about that as much. You're trying not to think, kind of about the just sort of what that moment would mean as somebody who's tried to get there. So you're kind of just trying to finish do the job the best you can and kind of prepare for it like you belong there. And that's kind of how I was approaching it. But in retrospect, when you kind of go back and you take a look at it, and it meant a lot. Obviously, I think it kind of started earlier in the week. Ryan Leslie was unable to do a few shows, and so I got the opportunity to do a couple earlier in the week. And then, I got a call. I think it was Thursday, so the Thursday before the Saturday, and we talked about joining Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday. And I kind of remember, I was at home at the time, and I got the call. We kind of went over a few different things, and my wife was upstairs, and I remember, going upstairs and telling her, like, they want me to do Hockey Night in Canada. And, obviously she was over the moon like I was, and you kind of, that's the kind of call you always wish you could get. And, so to be able to do it, I thought the show went, fairly well too, which was obviously the most important thing for me, was to not just be there. I wanted to do the job, as well as I possibly could. And, hopefully I did that. And it's one of those milestones that I think you're always trying to get to have that opportunity to be part of an NHL broadcast. It kind of feels like in Canada, it's one of the still kind of the biggest moments for a broadcaster. And I think kind of part of the real cool thing was getting so many different messages from everybody, some who I knew, some who I didn't, some who I've, obviously worked with in the past. And then even just some fellow broadcasters in the industry who I've never met. I thought it was really cool that, Hockey Night in Canada is still one of those things for people who you just always understand the magnitude of that, regardless of when it happens. And, I know the industry changes and continues to change, but that's always still one thing that is still our moment and the moment for a lot of people. So it was cool. It was really cool to do it. And hopefully it's not the last one in the career.
And you mentioned thinking about some of the people that have come before you on that show. Who were some of the sportscasters that you would listen to or that you would watch as a young fan?
Yeah, well, I mean, Ron is definitely at the top of that list. I think for sure, because of how long he's had that post as Hockey Night in Canada host, and just how perfect he is for that job, as we all know. And so I think he's kind of the first name that jumps to the page. I was actually also a big fan of James Duthie. Just I think he kind of really has a great combination of just his skills as a broadcaster, how smooth he is, how, also about combining the lighter side too, though. Like, he's got kind of a comedic side that he brings to it. And I think, as we kind of talked about in the last couple segments, I always think that that's an important part of it, but still super professional. And when he needs to be, you can take him, 100% serious, because if it's a serious topic, he handles that with class. And then also has that lighter side. So I'm a big fan of him. And then earlier in the day, I was born in Saskatoon. So way back when we had Sportsline, which a lot of, mid-sized markets would have their 30-minute sports shows. And Ray Morrison, who I got to work with a little bit at WHL and Shaw, he was mostly on the radio at the time. But then there was two guys that I always would watch on Sportsline. It was Barney Shankaruk and Chris Harris, actually. So they were the ones that would host Sportsline. And then when I got into high school, I got the chance to work like a day shift or a couple of opportunities to go in with Global as part of a career placement. And I went in and worked with Esther Madzia, who's now with Hockey Canada, actually. So she was the sports anchor at the time. So, it's kind of funny when you kind of look back at being able to, see the world through the shoes of a high school kid. And then obviously, then now as somebody who shares, the industry with them. So those are a couple of names I'll shout out.
For sure. And another big chapter in your career, as we have alluded to earlier on, was your 7 years at Global Calgary, covering the entire Calgary sports scene. I wanted to get into that a little bit deeper before we go today. As you look back on your time there from 2011 to 2018, what are the things that stand out about that experience?
Yeah, I think, for me, the biggest thing was, I got the opportunity. Grant Pollock, another name who I should have probably mentioned there, but he was one of my career mentors, being able to work alongside him at Global. He was the one that hired me over at Global. And I think as somebody who grew up in the area, you'd know this too. I mean, Calgary is such a great sports place for all sports. And we're not just talking, the fact that they've got the Flames here and you got the Stampeders and the Hitmen and the Roughnecks. It, obviously, professional wise, it's great too. But when you look at all the amateur side, the number of Canadian athletes that call this place home, the training. And I think that's one thing that I love the most about my time at Global, was being able to tell stories that were, we could find, that we could harness, that we could kind of, share the stories of athletes. And, one of my biggest things was always to work with amateur athletes. And I hate calling them amateur athletes because they are professional athletes in a lot of ways. The way they train and the way they live their lives, they are professionals. They just don't get paid like it. But, I think about the speed skaters, the bobsleigh and skeleton athletes, the lugers, the cross-country skiing. I mean, I dove into as much of that stuff as I possibly could and tried to form as many relationships with those athletes. And then, right down to high school sports. I always think that, as a job, as when you're at Global, was to try and tell the city's kind of sports story. And that's not always professional. I think that story is pretty well told, right? So it was upon us to kind of dive a little deeper and find those stories at the grassroots level. And that was one thing we always pride ourselves on. But Grant Pollock was the one who taught me that. And he was great to work with. So I took a lot from my time at Global. And then obviously, as we kind of talked about before, it was just the fact that, you were doing live TV all the time. And I'd work the weekends for the biggest chunk of that time. So you'd get every Saturday and Sunday, you'd get 2 shows of live TV, and the opportunity to be creative and to think on your feet and to do live TV. And you simply cannot replace that in this industry. You have to have the reps in order to get better. And that's what it did for me.
Were there any events in the Calgary sports scene that happened while you were at Global that got a chance to cover that were pretty cool?
Yeah, for sure. There was a number of them. You've just from a standpoint of travel, I think that's always kind of the big perk, right? Is to be able to go travel and cover sports events. So I went to a couple of Grey Cups, covered a winning Grey Cup in Vancouver in 2014, which was cool. Myself and my photographer were on the field there as the trophies being handed out and in the locker room afterwards. And then I was there in I think it was in Toronto. Yeah, I was in Toronto in 2016, I want to say, when they lost to the Red Blacks, Henry Burris and the Red Blacks. So I covered kind of both ends of the Grey Cup spectrum. And there is nothing worse than walking into a locker room after a team has just lost a championship. I'll tell you that much. It is a somber scene. So there's those kind of moments. And then, traveling with the Flames into the playoffs, they beat the Vancouver Canucks the year. Actually, Stage scored that kind of series clinching goal at home, and those kind of moments as well. And then just kind of all across the board, World Cups and things like that, where you're kind of there for championship type moments. I think those are kind of always the ones you remember for sure.
And you talk about covering big moments the Stampeders had and the Flames had while you were working as media with Global. And something I'm interested in is the difference between covering teams as as impartial media versus now where you're actually working for the Flames. Does that positioning change things a little bit, being outside media versus actually working for a club?
For sure. I think it does. I think a little bit to a certain extent. I think it changes, obviously the approach in an interview slightly, just kind of the way you frame questions. I think, more in the early stages, the early part, just kind of always thinking a little bit more about how you approach an interview. I don't think about it nearly as much now anymore because it's maybe a little bit more natural, but for sure, if you're a member of the outside media, you don't really have anybody, too worried about what types of questions you're going to ask from that standpoint, because there's no one really, aside from the player, who you're asking it to. And obviously I never really was a guy that was going to go in there and, knock down doors like that anyway. So it wasn't a huge change for me, but the only one that would hold you accountable would be the person you're asking for about the question to, in terms of, when you're working outside media, they might not like it as much, but they can, reply back. But from a company, from a Flame standpoint, I think you have a little bit more knowledge about how things are, operating behind the scenes, which you don't get exposed to. So you just have a different kind of perspective a little bit, kind of keeping that in mind. But at the same time, you're still doing a job that, requires you to, to talk about the games, and they're not all going to be good. And so, I think the Flames have always been great about that. Like, I've never really been talked to in terms of questions or, mindsets or anything like that. Like, I think they understand that, and we understand it's kind of a respect both sides. And you kind of just go about the job and you try to provide the audience with the best analysis or the best viewpoint and the best interviews you can do, no matter what the circumstance is. So I think, it changes a little bit just in terms of the thinking maybe, but at the same time, you still have to conduct good interviews. You still have to do good shows, and that's kind of the approach you take. And I think now it's kind of just all second nature. So it's been good that way.
And as we start to get close to winding down, I'll just go big picture for a couple more quick hitters. As you look at what you've done up to this point, a lot of wide-ranging experiences that we've touched on, covering in entire city, and now working covering the Flames, dedicated to covering the Flames, getting on Hockey Night in Canada. Is there anything about this your journey to this point that you're most proud of?
It's a great question. I don't know if I've thought about that a ton. I think, it's hard because, you always are trying to look, and I'm sure you've done this the same way. You're always kind of you have a long-term goal, I suppose, but at the same time, I think for me, I never really looked at it as much like that. Like I started, basically right out of high school, and I just wanted to work in the industry, and I wanted to work in sports. That was my goal. So it wasn't like a specific, obviously you'd love to do Hockey Night in Canada, but it was always more like, what's the next step for me? What's the next best step? And, I think I've always kind of approached it that way. And, I ended up, moving and taking on new jobs, or a lot of different jobs on the way up, but always trying to move up, never trying to go parallel or backwards. And, I think I did that for the most part. And then you kind of look at the experiences and, I've kind of done a lot of the things that if you take, again, I don't think about it on a daily basis, but if I look back now and kind of think of all the different experiences I've had the opportunity to do and to work in sports for as long as I have, which, as we know, is, hard in our industry a lot of times, is to have that, opportunity. I think that's maybe where I'm most proud of, to be able to make a career out of something I always dreamed of doing. And, obviously Hockey Night in Canada will be right up at the top of that list. But for me, it's more about, just being able to get the opportunity for as long as I have, I think.
And you talk about having long-term goals. When you started out, how does that evolve, and how does your thought about the future and future goals, how does that kind of change over time, and where do where do your thoughts sit right now as you think about the future of your career?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the fascinating thing right now about our industry in a lot of ways is that it seems to change so much, right? I mean, if you would have said even when I started at Global that, in 7-8 years I'd be working for the Calgary Flames, I don't think I would have even thought about that, right? Like even the position that I'm doing right now didn't exist to the same degree 5-7 years ago. So I think with our industry, it's just constantly evolving with it. And it's, I think that's another reason why it's almost hard to set real long-term goals anymore, because it keeps on changing so much. I think for me, it's kind of about evolving with it, understanding what you have to do now to be a part of the industry, and always kind of keeping an open mind in terms of opportunities when they come up. And obviously, if you could work for Hockey Night in Canada in a full-time scenario, that would be amazing. But at the same time, I love what I'm doing now, and I love to be working with an NHL team and covering the NHL on a regular basis. So I think it's just kind of the evolution of the industry and the evolution of sports in general about what positions exist now versus what they when they didn't a number of years ago, and kind of enjoying the ride.
And last one for you. We've talked a lot about the changing of the broadcasting industry, and especially the way sports is covered. If you were talking to any either young sportscasters just getting into it or kids thinking about getting into it, is there any piece of advice you would give those people?
I think that's another thing that's changed a little bit. I used to always kind of describe, a world where I always used to say never shut down a job, because when I started in radio, and then the second job I ever had in the industry had really nothing to do with on air. I kind of snuck my way on air as much as I could possibly do it, but it was more of a behind the scenes role. And I still think that serves me today just as much as anything else I did in my career. So, the first thing would be, that you're never too big for any job. That being in the industry, working in the industry is more important than not working. So I knew people who didn't want to take a job in X city. They wanted to be in this city, and, you kind of pigeonhole yourself a little bit. But I think, even that's changed a little bit. And now, platforms exist where you can get your reps. I think, it all circles back for me to just getting the opportunity to work and to try and to, hone your skills as a broadcaster. And the reps is a big part of that. So that's kind of where it's at. But the nice thing about our world right now is that you have podcasts, you have any and all opportunities to do what you want to do and to craft and harness your own, skill set. So I think that's the great thing, is that just try it, just work on your skills, work on it, and talk to people in the industry. There's so many good people out there who are willing to share their experiences and share their expertise, but don't be afraid to reach out.
And one of those new avenues to get reps in is the show right here.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Brendan. This has been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and it's a thrill to collaborate with you again. So thanks so much for spending an hour with us here on the show, and all the best with the off season.
Appreciate the time, and always a big fan of your work, and love visiting with you out there in Okotoks, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Appreciate it. Yeah, as soon as the dogs can open the gates again, which will probably be next season, I'll be coming back, and I'll drop you a line, and maybe we can share a pop at the dogs game.
We'll share a glass of vinegar.
There we go. All right, Brendan, thanks so much for coming on. We'll let you go, but thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be back after one more break on the other side with the wrap up, and also a quick update on a couple of our behind the mic friends of the show who've had milestones in their careers recently. So once again, thanks to Brendan Parker. I'll be back with the wrap up here on the other side of this message here on Behind the Mic. and back here to wrap up another week on Behind the Mic. Jonathan Hodgson back with you. Just finished up a chat with Brendan Parker from Flames TV. Had a great time talking about the Calgary Flames season that was, some of his experiences from covering the Flames up close and going bigger picture on his career, including his time with Global TV in Calgary, covering the Calgary sports scene. He's one of the good ones for sure. So once again, we want to thank him for coming on and making some time for us. And just before we wrap up the show this week, I wanted to give a little bit of congratulations to a couple of our Behind the Mic friends of the show who've had big events take place in their careers recently, and we want to wish them all the best in it. One of our former guests here on the show, an all-time favorite of mine, Alex Jensen, is the play-by-play voice of the Stockton Ports Low A affiliate of the Oakland Athletics. On Monday night, he got the call up to fill in for A's radio voice Ken Korak, and he worked his first Major League game. Alex worked his first Major League game on Oakland A's radio beside Vince Cotroneo, a 4-2 Seattle Mariners win over the A's at the Coliseum in Oakland. Jensen's an Oakland kid. Grew up going to A's games at the Coliseum, so that was a really, really special moment for him to receive the call up for that game. So once again, congratulations to Alex on his Major League debut. He's a favorite of mine. We go way back. Him and I shared a broadcast booth with the Okotoks Dogs back in the day when he had off days from pitching for the team. He would come up and do some work with me. So that was a thrill to be able to hear Alex in the major leagues. And another note here is Claire Hanna. We had her on a couple of months ago. TSN, CFL and TSN sideline reporter and CTV Regina reporter. She has been named as a beach volleyball play-by-play voice for the Tokyo Olympics coming up. You know, that's been a dream and a goal of hers. So congratulations on that assignment. And she is also right now over in Latvia covering the World Hockey Championships for TSN and getting to do some in-person work, interviewing players over at the World Championships in Latvia. I know she's having a blast on that assignment, so congratulations on the Olympic assignment and working the World Hockey Championships. Claire Hanna, another one of our favorites. So that'll do it for another week here on Behind the Mic. Reminder that if you missed any part of this show or you want to go back and watch any of our archives here of Behind the Mic, including Alex Jensen, Claire Hanna, and our other all-star lists of former guests, you can go to astvproductions.com. That's where you'll find Behind the Mic and all of our other show archives and live broadcasts, as well as live games. We also simulcast on Facebook, and you can find further ASTV show updates on Twitter as well. So that'll do it for another week of Behind the Mic. We'll be back with you next week, same time, same place, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, with another chat with another great sportscaster. So, one final time, thanks to Brendan Parker for spending some time with us this evening, and thanks to you for tuning us in wherever you watched from this evening. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your Friday night with us. I'm Jonathan Hodgson, and for my guest, Brendan Parker. Thanks for watching, and we will talk to you again next week.